بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذرياته ومن اهتدى بهديه إلى يوم الدين. تركنا عن محجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك ثم أما بعد. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord and Sustainer of the worlds. We beseech and implore Him to offer His blessings and salutations upon His last Prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and upon His wives, His kin, His companions, and all of those who follow His guidance to the last day. He has left for us a clear, pristine path. All who follow it will find guidance, and those who waver from it will only find perdition. ثم أما بعد. So, inshallah, today we'll have a blessed day, a beneficial day, bi'iznillahi ta'ala, as we have not been gathered here except for seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let that be our niyyah, let that be our intention in all our endeavors, but especially when one is seeking knowledge, talab al-ilm. And the Prophet ﷺ spoke much about talab al-ilm and its importance, as many of you are aware. And he said, طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم ومسلمة. That seeking knowledge is an obligation upon all Muslims, whether male or female. And the importance of ilm cannot be overstated. And in actuality, ilm it's a means to an end. And that ends is amal. Is how we live, what we do, the works that we do, how we treat others, how our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, how our relationship with those around us, how our relationship even with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is. All of that is amal. But you cannot have this amal clearly informed and guided except via ilm, except via knowledge. And ultimately that's what separates the type of makhluk, the type of creature we are from all the rest of the creatures. All of their amal, or what they do, is based upon fitra. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fatara an-nas alayha, and as well as animals. In other words, they do things intrinsically or inherently. The lion hunts the zebra, not because it was taught how to do so, but because it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in the lion that in order to sustain itself, it needs to eat, and so it will go hunt the zebra or the wildebeest. And the zebra intrinsically knows when it smells the lion to run. No one taught it to be afraid of the lion, but it knows that lions are bad news for zebras. But the human being, even though we have this fitra as well, and our fitra is hasan, it's good, it's pure, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Kullu insan yuladu al fitra." Every human being is born in a state of fitra, in a primordial state of purity and husn and goodness. Unlike what other religions say, and those that believe in original sin and that we are encumbered by the sins of our forefathers and our predecessors, we have no such concept. In Islam, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. No soul shall bear the burden of another in terms of what it has transgressed. So, our fitra informs who we are. But as the rest of the hadith goes, the hadith al-fitra, وَإِنَّمَا يُهَوِّدَانَهُ أَوْ يُنَصِّرَانَهُ أَوْ يُمَجِّسَانَهُ أَهْلُهُ أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. But it's rather their experience raised by their parents. They are taught another way, whether to in a different religion or no religion whatsoever. And so we can lose sight of what our fitra is. And additionally, this fitra does not inform specific deeds and acts. This can only be known, as they say, min jihat al-shara', can only be known from wahi, from revelation, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or via the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, namely Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so all that we know, we denote as good is what the Sharia says is good, what the Prophet ﷺ has said is good, what Allah said is good, and all that is bad is what the Sharia says is bad, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet ﷺ. And so we call someone muwaffaq, someone successful, when their own inclination, when their own fitra guides them to not only recognize rationally, intellectually what the Sharia says is good and is bad, but they actually, those meanings, they live it, they feel it. It becomes almost second nature to them, that they understand this. And there were many men and women who lived before us and who are living amongst us now who are at this, who live their life according to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His intent, and with His pleasure, based upon the states that they have reached from being imbued and imbibed with the meanings of the Sunnah and the meanings of the glorious meanings of the Quran and Allah's speech, Azza wa Jal. So this can only happen, all of it. The process can only begin, you can only be drawn near by ilm, by knowledge, by the seeking of knowledge. And knowledge is a vast, infinite ocean. You will never get to the end of it. If you are lucky enough, you will stand perhaps by its shores. You might get your feet a little bit wet, but no one can actually swim and traverse the vast ocean of knowledge. We can only get glimpses of it. But through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's infinite mercy and His favor and His virtue and His men upon us, even those glimpses are enough to enlighten us, are enough to bring us openings, to bring us futuh, to bring us understandings of that which we did not know from before. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even in His infinite mercy, He says that a gate, a door to that knowledge can even be just taqwa, can be following that which He has commanded us and leaving out or abandoning, forsaking that which He has asked us to refrain from. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. Have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will teach you. Allah will show you. And so many of us, we sometimes lament that we don't have access to teachers and there's no ulama and scholars around us, and we're living in a non-Muslim society and it's difficult. And yeah, it's all nice on Saturday when we can sit and we can wear our thobe and our turban and imamah, but then Monday comes and we have to go to school, we have to go to work, and we dress a different way and we speak a different way and amongst the non-Muslims and so forth. All of that need not be a cause for worry, because how you are here is how you should be over there, and who you are is not this. Who you are is inside, and what informs who you are is the light that Allah can gaze upon you with from Him. That's who you are, not the outward, not the zahir only. Those who only see the zahir, in other words, the outward appearance of things, don't see anything. You're blind, right? Because this is nothing. It's a mirage, right? A facade. It's just the side of the building, right? Like if we're standing outside this building and all we saw was the bricks and the parking lot and the people milling about and walking around, but we never walked inside. We never stepped inside. Can we say we know the building, or what's going on, or the people in it, or what they're doing? No, we just saw the facade. And you won't see the reality of things, what's behind the zahir, what's behind the facade, except if Allah enlightens you. Right? The Quran talks about these people. يَعْلَمُونَ الظَّاهِرَ مِنْ حَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. They only know the zahir of the hayat of the dunya, of the life of the dunya, right? And hum عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ. But in terms of the akhirah, they don't see it. It's not there for them. Because you can only see the akhirah, not with basar, not with the vision of the eyes, but with basira, which is the vision of the heart. And the vision of the heart is more penetrating, it's more vivid, it sees clearly, or more clearly than the vision of the eyes, because your eyes can deceive you. Right? You can be deceived. You think you see something, and then when you step up a little bit closer, it's not what you thought at all. But the vision of the heart, al-basira, if it's true, is unerring. Unerring means what? It doesn't make mistakes. It's always true. Right? When the Prophet ﷺ, he said, اتقوا فراسة المؤمن فإنه ينظر بإيش؟ بنور الله. Have taqwa, be mindful, be careful of the firasa. And the firasa can also mean basira, or the spiritual vision of the believer. فَإِنَّهُ يَنظُرُ بِنُورِ اللَّهِ. For he sees, he looks by the light of God, by the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not by his physical senses, by his vision. So all that you know and all that you can feel and grasp and understand is by your senses, only your sensory knowledge, then you don't know anything. You know nothing. Because that's such a small aspect of things. It's so trivial and minuscule when you compare it to what you can actually see, really see with your heart. And so for others to be people of basira, people of tadabbur, thinking and contemplation, it requires dedication. It requires ta'anni, to be slow and deliberate in our actions, in our dealings with people. It requires us to take a step back, not to be quick in judging situations or judging others. It requires us to be careful with our tongues, to refrain from saying things or thinking of something that immediately comes to mind and we start saying it immediately. Those are signs of heedless people. People who just say whatever comes to mind without thinking about how it will affect others or what particular actions others might have or the consequences of what they say. That's heedlessness. That's ghafla. Complete state of not remembering, of not knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one of the brothers picked me up from Birmingham yesterday. He asked me, give us some tips about seeking knowledge. And actually I have it in my little notebook here that I wrote down. I just saw it. And they said, adab al-ilmi arba'a. That the adab of knowledge, or the form, the etiquettes of knowledge are 4 things. Shaykh fattah, wa aql rajah, wa kutub sihah, wa madawamat wa ilhah. They kind of rhyme, but the meanings are there. Shaykh fattah means a shaykh who has been enlightened. Wa aql rajah, which means a piercing intellect and mind. Wa kutubun sihah, and books texts that you're reading from that are valid, that are correct, are sahih in and of themselves. Wa madawamatun wa ilhah, right? Madawama wa ilhah means a constancy and a dedication to finding that knowledge. So inshallah, all of you, aqlun rajah is there. All of you, I think, have piercing intellects and are quite smart. Wa kutubun sihah, we're going to read from Bukhari, inshallah. So Imam Shafi'i said there is no sounder book after the Quran except the Sahih of Imam Bukhari. Wa madawamtun wa ilhah, constancy and dedication. The fact that you're here on a Saturday morning when you can be doing many other things is also there. But the first one, Shaykhun Fattah, 3 out of 4 isn't bad, right? So, inshallah, we'll, they say, مَا لَا يُدْرَكُ كُلُّهُ لَا يُتْرَكُ جُلُّهُ. That which if you can only have 3 out of 4, 2 out of 4, it's better than nothing. So at least you get yourself on the way, inshallah. So, what we'll be doing this morning and some of this afternoon, inshallah, is to read from the abridgment of Imam Al-Bukhari, which is a book I started reading and teaching several years ago, maybe originally in, I want to say 2003, 2004, so nearly a decade ago. And it's one of the books that the ulama have given a lot of attention to. I'm also doing a similar class online via the Seeker's Guidance website, and that's live streamed on Thursday evenings at 9 p.m. UK time. There's no fees for anyone who wants to log in and watch it. They're free to do so. If you happen to miss that time, they also, usually within a few days, they have the recordings available on YouTube. So I've done 3 so far. I think, I'm not sure if the third one is uploaded yet, but the first 2 are already there. And in the first session, I spoke a lot about Imam Al-Bukhari and how he's compiled his collection and some of the history behind it, and Imam Al-Jama. So I don't want to repeat too much of that here. But for those of you who are interested, you can always watch it on the YouTube. It's about an hour, 15 minutes or so. So the ulama have paid much attention to the abridgment of Al-Bukhari, especially beginning some 200 to 300 years ago. Because as we know, the compilation of Bukhari itself is pretty long. Ibn Hajar, he counts the number of hadith in it, including the muqarrar, including the repeats, and including the mu'allaq. And mu'allaq is the hadith he put in there that he didn't give a sanad for, a chain of transmission, numbering around 7,300, 7,400 so hadith. If you take away the muqarrar, the ones that are repeated, and there's a reason there's a repeat, which I might get to in a second, then it's more like 4,000. And then if you take away the mu'allaq, which are the hadith that he included in some of the chapter headings but did not include the sanad or the chain of transmission, then you remove a further 1,300 or so. So you're talking about a little less than 3,000, 2,700, 2,800 hadith with a complete chain of transmission that are not repeats in Al-Bukhari. Then in the 7th century, Abdullah ibn Abi Jamrah, radiallahu anhu, who was an Andalusian scholar who lived his latter life in Egypt and also passed away there, and he's actually buried there very close to the maqam of Ibn Ata al-Sakandari, the famous compiler of the aphorisms, Hikam ibn Ata al-Sakandari, which are the aphorisms in Tasawwuf, buried very close to him. And also buried very close to the great Hanafi jurist Al-Kamal ibn Humam. They're all in a similar area in the Qarafa, in the lower Qarafa in Cairo. So Shaykh Abdullah ibn Abi Jamrah, he made a mukhtasar, or an abridgment, of the whatever thousands of hadith that we're talking about in Imam Bukhari, and his number a little less than 300, about 296, 297 hadith that he took from those. So basically 1 out of every 10 hadith that was not repeated or not included from the mu'allaq, he chose. And he stated the reasons why he did so in his khutbah. The beginning of these classical texts, it's also often called khutbat al-kitab. The word muqaddimah, also used, introduction, came a little bit later, but usually the more classical term is khutbah. Khutbah we know means like khutbat al-jum'ah, an address. But here his khutbah in the beginning, he's sort of giving the reasons why he wrote the book and so forth. And it's important when you read the books that you read the khutbah, you read the muqaddimah, the introduction, because in it you get some insight as to the reasoning why, and why did the author choose this particular format, and what was he trying to do, and why is it different than those who came before him. So he said, during his time, which was the 7th century of the Hijrah, right, and now we're in the 15th century, so that's 800 years ago, like a very long time, then that means he was saying during his time that he saw that people were no longer having the himma, or the aspiration, to read Al-Bukhari with its full isnad, which are the men and women in the chain of transmission. So when Bukhari narrates, he has thulathiyat and he has ruba'iyat. So either he has 3 men or women between him and the Prophet ﷺ, or 4. So to know that chain of transmission, to memorize it, he said it was too much for people. They didn't have the same aspiration as the earlier people did, and he wanted to encourage people to re-engage with hadith. So you can judge, you can infer from his kalam, what he's saying, that there was perhaps a sort of distance between people and the study of hadith even during that time, which was the 7th century of the Hijrah. And we see that often when the ummah has a nahda, or it has a sort of a renaissance period, which happens periodically, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send a renewer, a mujaddid, man yujaddidu laha deenaha, for the ummah, for once every century or once every 100 years. And oftentimes this tajdeed, which is important, we should differentiate between tajdeed and islah, reform. Many of the contemporaries that we see around today, they say Islam needs a reformation, we need to reform it, it's broken, it's fixed, it needs a reformation like happened with the Protestant Reformation, blah, 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 blah. In Islamic paradigm, in our classic paradigm, we talk of renewal, not reformation. Because what reformation means, it means to reform something. In other words, it's broken and you have to fix it. Islam is never broken. But people's relationship and their mu'amala with the deen is always in need of renewal. Right? Imam al-Ghazali, he called his book al-Ihya. What does Ihya means? To revivify, to renew, to re-enliven. Right? So sort of remind people of what this deen is all about. So that's what renewal is. It's sort of a reminder. It's not coming to say it's broken from its foundations and it needs to be reformed. So to use the word reform, it's not really acceptable in terms of how we talk about our deen, because that would infer that we're saying something is wrong with it. But there's plenty wrong with the ummah, so the ummah needs to be reminded and it needs to have a renewal of its relationship with the deen. So many times the renewal happened with a renewal in sort of a renewal or a revivification with the relationship with the Prophet ﷺ via the hadith. Imam al-Ghazali's renewal in al-Ahya was a renewal of the taking things beyond just their ostensible, beyond their zahir, in terms of our ibadat, how we pray, the zakah, the fasting. So he felt that during his time, these things were becoming routine, that people were engaging them as a matter of routine, more than as a matter of conviction and a matter of taraqi, and a matter of being raised in degrees. So that's why he called his book Ahya Ulum ad-Deen. So Ulum ad-Deen, the sciences of the deen, it needed to be re-enlivened. And re-enlivenment means was re-engaging with it in a way that you not only understand the rules and ahkam behind the prayer and behind zakah and fasting, but also what are the hikam, what are the wisdoms, what are the ways that were meant for the prayer for you to be a better Muslim, to be a better person, to be a better insan, so forth. So Ibn Abi Jamrah, you can infer from his muqaddimah or his khutbah that there needed to be a renewal with hadith or with the kalam of the Prophet ﷺ. And we know the Prophet ﷺ via his sunnah. And we know his sunnah, one of the ways that we know his sunnah, or the primary way that we know his sunnah, is from the hadith. And one of the primary collections of hadith is Hadith Imam Al-Bukhari, which is generally considered to be the soundest compilation of hadith. Not to say that the others are not sound, but he had the most rigorous conditions for his hadith, for him to include them in his sahih. And we know that Ibn Hajar says in his muqaddimah that Imam al-Bukhari originally was selecting out of a pool of 600,000 hadith. So Imam al-Bukhari was a man who probably had about 1 million hadith memorized. And then from there he chose out of those the sahih. And even he said himself, he said, I didn't put all of the sahih. He said, I didn't put all of the rigorously authenticated hadith that I could possibly put. I picked and chose what I wanted to put. And you can see that from the style of Al-Bukhari, namely that it's what's called in the fiqh style. In other words, each chapter you can discern the fiqh of Imam Al-Bukhari, as they say, what he thought on a particular ruling by the hadith that he included in that book. Right. So the first chapter he called Kitab Bad al-Wahi, the book of the beginning of revelation. And so he included in there Hadith Bad al-Wahi. He also included in there hadith in Namal Amalu bin Niyat as a tabarruk, starting with that hadith. And he included other hadith dealing with the Prophet ﷺ's initial encounter with the wahi, with the revelation, with the angel Jibreel alayhi salam in Ghar Hira. And then he has other books, Kitab al-Salah, Kitab al-Zakah, and then he'll have subheadings that talk about a particular ruling under that. Much in the same way that Imam Malik did that. Perhaps Imam Malik was the first to compile the hadith in this manner, but what Imam Malik did was also include not just hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, but also sayings of some of the tabi'een, like Sa'id ibn Musayyib, and some even of people after the tabi'een, like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. He includes even very early in Muwatta, in Kitab Wuqut al-Salah, or the times of prayers. So his was more like a combination of hadith and fiqh. Imam al-Bukhari, he was primarily just concentrating on the hadith compilation itself. And before Imam al-Bukhari, no one really had just made a single compilation of just Sahih hadith, or the most rigorously authenticated hadith. There were musannafat and musnadat, musnad meaning in the order of the rawi, by alphabetical order, much as like Imam Ahmad did, who was before Imam al-Bukhari. Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba, even Imam Abu Hanifa is reported to have a musnad of all of the hadith and the ruwat and so forth. But Bukhari was the first to put it in a manner that was that compilation. So he was a renewer of sorts in that he did that beginning. So going back to the abridger, the one who abridged Imam al-Bukhari's compilation, Imam Abi Jamrah, he said that aspirations were not as much, so he wanted to just have the single Sahabi Rawi, narrator of the hadith, and then the matan of the hadith. So people can be more engaged with the matan of the hadith. The isnad is very important, because what the isnad tells us, this hadith is verifiable and that the Prophet ﷺ said it or did it. That's important. But no less important is the matan of the hadith. What are the meanings of the words of the Prophet ﷺ? How can we benefit from them? How do we apply them to our lives? And that's also equally important. And perhaps he felt during his time that there was more emphasis on compiling and looking at the isnad, which is a science of hadith, right? But it's not everything about hadith. And that the other aspect of it, in other words, the meanings and the ahkam and so forth that can be derived from the matan of the hadith, was being somewhat neglected. So he did that, and he made it short, as I said, 300 or so hadith, so that people can do that. And actually, his commentary on the Mukhtasar that he did himself is unique in some aspects, in that he actually took a very analytical approach to the hadith, looking at the words and even some of the meanings behind the words. So it was almost like a ishari commentary, just like we have ishari tafsir. Tafsir al-ishara is a type of tafsir that looks to the meanings of the ayat, not just for their linguistic meaning, but other meanings that can be derived, in as much as that they are conforming with the basic precepts of the Sharia, and they are not contravening any of them. And this was more associated with the ulama of tasawwuf, who had some of these tafsir al-ishara, like Imam al-Qushayri, Sahib al-Risala. He has the epistle of Imam al-Qushayri, which is a very primary book of tasawwuf, and he also did a tafsir ishari about some of the meanings in the Quran. Tafsir al-Sulami also is a tafsir ishari, very famous one that came later. Tafsir Ibn Ajiba, the Moroccan scholar, dealing also with tafsir al-ishari. So Imam Abi Jamrah, you can almost think of it as a sharh ishari, or like a type of spiritual commentary on the hadith. So, what I wanted to read today was from the first ahadith dealing with prayer and things having to do with prayer from Al-Bukhari. And I think it's important that we as the salah is imad ad-deen, it's the pillar of the faith. If you don't have salah, then you don't have deen. And here, it can be understood in two ways. Don't have salah, you don't have deen. That one, if you don't pray at all, then as some of the ulama questioned even the validity of calling yourself a Muslim to that extent if you don't pray. That's one aspect. And why would someone put themselves in a position where their iman, their Islam, is a debate between the ulama? Some of them said he's still Muslim, but he's asi, he's disobedient. While others said no, he's not really Muslim at all, because the Prophet ﷺ said, the prayer is a pillar of faith, and you take away the pillar, then there's no building anymore, it falls down, so forth. So why put yourself in a position to be your iman is debatable? And secondly, no salah, no deen means, well, what type of salah do you have? What type of prayer do you actually have? If it's merely a routine, an exercise that you do up and down 5 times a day, and there's no meaning behind it, right? There's no taraqqi. You don't feel that as each day passes, as each prayer passes, you are better than you were in the previous prayer. That was the taraqqi of the Sahaba, right? They go pray Salat al-Dhuhr, some hours pass, and they pray Asr, and they're better at Asr than they were at Dhuhr. That was them. That was the Sahaba. How many of us can claim that for ourselves? How many of us can say that? My iman, my faith, my understanding of the deen, my application of the deen and how I deal with people is will be better this evening than it was this morning, based upon my salah only, based upon how the meanings I'm getting out of my prayer. So it's a difficult claim to make for most of us. So I'm advocating sort of we should have a constant renewal of the relationship in our salah. And as we read in one of the hadith today, that when a person prays, إِنَّمَا يُنَاجِي رَبَّهُ. Yunaji Rabbah means that he is having a sort of inner conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when you're praying, who are you talking to? Who are you addressing? You're addressing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He's addressing you. Right? Because when you read Quran, which is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? His words are speaking to you. And when you are in qiyam or you're making sujood and you say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la or you say Subhana Rabbi al-Azim or you're making dua in the sujood, you're addressing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's actually a two-way, two-channel communication that you're having when you're praying. And that's the whole idea of dhikr. Either Allah is speaking to you or you're speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ. Right? It says in the Quran, فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ. Remember me and I will remember you. What could be more of an incentive than that? Just say Allah. The minute I said that, hopefully Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He remembers me. All I have to do is remember Him and He remembers me. فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ وَاشْكُرُوا لِي وَلَا تَكْفُرُونَ. Right? And thank me, have gratitude, وَلَا تَكْفُرُونَ, and do not have kufr, either kufr bawah, which is to deny Allah and have associate partners with Him, or kufran al-ni'mah. Kufran al-ni'mah means to deny the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored upon you. That's a type of kufr as well. So, the prayer is fundamental. And anyone who, we're all in a state of tawbah, right? We're all in a state of repentance. Always. You can never say, well, I made tawbah about that a few years ago, alhamdulillah. La, you're still making tawbah, because we're all makhluq and we're all insan. وَكُلُّ إِنسَانٍ خَطَّاءٍ وَخَيْرُ الْخَطَّائِينَ التَّوَّابُونَ. Right? Every person makes mistakes, and will continue to make mistakes. That's our nature, right? حتى كلمة الإنسان. Insan, person, comes from the Arabic word, or is associated with the Arabic word nisyan, which means to forget. So part of our makeup, our nature is we're forgetful creatures. We forget, But the idea of tawbah, as Imam al-Ghazali says, means a return from tariq al-bu'd ila tariq al-qurb, from the way of distance to the way of nearness. So think of as a mistake as a slip off that path of qurb towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And tawbah, you're coming back to it. So if you know, it's like you're driving down the street or walking in. You made a wrong turn and you're no longer going towards your destination. So tawbah means make a U-turn and go back. Get back to the right path, to the right way, so you continue on your destination, right? Because as we're driving along, we're all distracted by everything around us, and you know, we turn left into this alleyway here because we saw something interesting, right? And weren't sure what it was, but we went there and then realized it was a mistake to go down that alleyway. Then you have tawbah. So you come back, and this is a constant process. So if we're always making tawbah, then part of that tawbah should concentrate on the salah, on the prayer itself. How we are making progress, how we are having that munajah, that inner conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via our prayer, via the salah. So I hope, inshallah, to read a few of these hadith as much as we can get through. If we finish some of them, we might go to another section. We'll see how it goes, inshallah. So we have, what time is this initial one supposed to end? 5 minutes? Okay, so maybe we'll start the first hadith and then we'll take it from there, inshallah. So, so those of you who are interested, this first hadith was included in the chapter heading, I believe, of Bukhari. So it comes right before the 385th hadith, according to the tarqim of Muhammad Fuad Abd al-Baqi, who probably has the most agreed upon tarqim, or numbering of the hadith. Ibn Hajar also has his own numbering, which is not too dissimilar from his numbering. So كتاب الصلاة بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم عن جابر بن عبد الله وأبي سعيد رضي الله عنهما صليا في السفينة قائمين وقال الحسن تصلي قائما ما لم تشق على أصحابك تدور معها وإلا فقاعدا. So this hadith is narrated by the Sahabi Jabir ibn Abdullah and Abi Sa'id al-Khudri, may Allah be pleased with them both, that they prayed in the boat, in the safina, standing up, قائمين. وقال الحسن, who was a further rawi, Hasan al-Basri, تصلي قائما, you pray standing up, ما لم تشق على أصحابك, as long as it's not a difficulty for your companions. تدور معها وإلا فقاعدا, you move with it, or otherwise if you're unable to, then you pray sitting down. Now, this hadith is what we call hadith mawquf. And mawquf means this chain of transmission goes back to the Sahaba only. And it doesn't, in its chain of transmission, include all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. But we see nevertheless that Al-Bukhari included this hadith al-mawquf in his compilation, even though it didn't go back straight to the Prophet ﷺ. And it's narrated by Jabir, who is a prolific hadith narrator, Ibn Abdullah, and Abi Sa'id al-Khudri, two of the senior companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And that they prayed standing up while they're on a boat, while they're traversing the ocean. So one might ask then, why did the Imam al-Bukhari include it if it was not narrated directly to the Prophet ﷺ? Well, the reason for that is that by a consensus of the ulama, the fa'al of the Sahaba, what the Sahaba did, is a reflection of what the Prophet ﷺ did. Most of the time. Most of the time, when it's dealing with something of ibadat, when it's dealing with something of a nature that they could have only known by being with the Prophet ﷺ. So when they say things like, some of the Sahaba narrate about some of the signs of the Day of Judgment, and they don't relate it back to the Prophet ﷺ. The Sahaba are udul. The Sahaba, all of them are trustworthy. So they're not going to make something up. And they could have only known about something like the signs of the Day of Judgment had they heard it from the Prophet himself ﷺ. So they say it's hadith mawquf fi hukm al-marfu'. It's hadith mawquf. It's a hadith that's narrated by the Sahabi, but its ruling and what we understand from it is like it was, as if it was narrated from the Prophet himself ﷺ. Hadith al-marfu'. And this is significant because our understanding of who the Sahaba were and who they are and what we take from them is very important. Because consider, if it were not for the Sahaba, we wouldn't know our deen. Right? Did any of us actually live with the Prophet ﷺ? Actually see him? So how do we know him? We know him via what the Sahaba narrated about him. Well, we didn't actually live with the Sahaba either, right? Then we wouldn't know our deen except if it were for the tabi'een. Right? And the tabi'een, or the followers, means the ones who came after the companions. Well, we didn't sit with them either. So how do we know the deen? Tabi'een, the one who came after them, which was the generation of Abu Hanifa and Malik and Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal radiallahu anhu. Well, we didn't sit with them either. Then their students, so forth. So the idea that the understanding of the deen, right, and you'll see this, this is one of the first lines written in the ijazat that the ulama give. Al-isnadu min ad-deen. Al-isnadu min ad-deen. Isnad means supporting, whether it's hadith or the text, or your understandings, back to an isnad, right, back to a sanad. Sanad means something that literally it means, when I say sanadtu ala shaykh, it means I leaned on it to support myself. So the sanad is what you're leaning on, what you're using as your support for your understanding, for your connection to the text. Because the meanings of what we understand of the text cannot be understood independently of the context. And this is a mistake many people make. They think they can go into Al-Bukhari and read Fulan's translation of it in English, and now they know the deen, and that they can make fatwa and tell people how to live. And come ask me, and I'll let you know this ruling is wrong and this ruling is correct, and so forth. That's not deen. This deen is mawruth. This deen is inherited, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that about himself. نحن معشر الأنبياء لا نورث دينارا ولا درهما. Us, the prophets, we do not leave behind gold and silver. What we leave behind is the ilm, is the knowledge, is the legacy of what we brought, the da'wah. That's what's left behind. That's the irth, that's the inheritance, right? And you cannot claim your inheritance unless that inheritance was passed on to you by the one who inherited it before you did, and the one before you did, and the one before you did, and so on. هذا هو الإسناد, right? So the shuyukh that we sat with, they have an isnad with their shuyukh, who have an isnad with their shuyukh, who have an isnad all the way back to an unbroken chain back to the Prophet ﷺ. Without this, without a sanad, it's as if you are, sort of hanging off by a thread somewhere, and you're not connected to the understandings and the barakah of having that chain back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in the times we live in now, this system has broken down a little bit, in that we don't see as much as importance placed upon it as was before. But maybe just 100 years ago, no alim, no scholar could claim he was a scholar except if he had a sanad, except if he had this ijaz and had chain of transmission. And the institutes that were set up, like even Al-Azhar, like Zaytuna in Tunis, like Al-Qarawiyyin in Fas, these grand institutes of Islamic learning, inshallah, they remain so and will even be better in the future. It wasn't so much about the institute, it was more about the shuyukh who were there and the books that you read with them. So it always centered around the text, what book you read, and the shaykh you studied with, and his approval of your understanding of that text. And then you can pass it on. But what happens today is people build these nice libraries in their house, and they buy, they make a nice trip to the Middle East, and they buy these very nice coverings and mujalladat of books, and with the most modern print. And now they even have these modern prints. You open the book and there's like a background with flowers and things, and they put that so forth, and khalas, I have the ilm, it's here, right? كَمَثْلِ حِمَارٍ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا, like the donkey who carries the asfar, who carries the books on its back, and it has no idea what's in it, or what it's talking about, what it means. And Imam Malik, he warned us, he said, إِنَّ هَذَا الْأَمْرَ دِينٌ فَانْظُرُوا مِمَّنْ تَأْخُذُونَ دِينَكُمْ. This amr, this thing, knowledge we're talking about, it's deen. So look to who you take your knowledge from. And Imam Malik was renowned for this. There was a great scholar in Mecca that Malik wanted to study with, but he had seen him or heard him that he did something like he had made masah of the mimbar. He had touched the mimbar like for tabarruk, which it's not a kabira, it's not a major sin or anything like that. But for Malik, he thought that was not becoming of the state of an alim to do something like that, so he didn't want to study with him, because he wanted to take his deen only from the most rigorous and the most authentic of sources, and he didn't want to even delve into something that was remote from this, or that possibly had some dubious matters about it. Nowadays, we want to know something, we go to Shaykh Google, type in, and then if it comes on the first page, right, because we don't go to the second page, if it comes on the first page, it must be true, because I saw it on 2 websites, right? And then we go post it in our Facebook status, and we say, see, this is what the deen says about this, or says about that, and so forth. And we call that deen. So, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. When you have a musibah, right, الذين أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We are for Allah, and surely will return to Him. So back to the hadith. So Jabir radiallahu anhu, Abu Sa'id radiallahu anhu, كذلك, they were seen praying in the safina while they were standing. So 1, we have the matter of the prayer, and 2, they're praying even in a boat. And perhaps it behooves us to remember here that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, and this is amongst the khasa'is of this ummah, in other words, it's from something specific to our ummah, the ummah of Muhammad ﷺ, جُعِلَتْ لِي الْأَرْضُ مَسْجِدًا وَطُهُورًا. The earth, all of it, when we say al-ard, here it means not just piece of earth, anywhere. Masjidan wa tuhura. A masjid, a place where I can make sujood, or a place I can pray. And tuhur, and a way by which to do purification. Here referring to tayammum. That you can use the dirt of the earth and the clay to do a type of ablution when you don't have water. This particular hukum that's specific to the Sharia al-Muhammadiyya was not in any of the previous Shara'a. It was not in the Sharia of Moses alayhi salam, nor was it in the Sharia of Isa, or Dawood, or Sulaiman, or Nuh, or any of the prophets before him. So when he says "Ju'ilat li," it means only for me. It wasn't before. Ardu masjidan wa tuhura. So that means you pray anywhere. And this is a ni'mah, this is a blessing. Bani Israel, when they had to pray, they can only pray in their mihrab. Right? If you read Surah Ali Imran, and Sayyidina Zakaria alayhi salam is when he saw that Maryam alayhi salam had this birth of Isa in a miraculous manner, and he saw that he was an old man and so was his wife, then he prayed in his mihrab. وَهُوَ يُصَلِّي فِي الْمِحْرَابِ. That's when the angels came to inform him that you will be given a birth, you will be given a son. So he was praying in his mihrab, which is his prayer area. So the Bani Israel, and Zakaria alayhi salam was a prophet of Bani Israel, only prayed in their prayer area. So if you were traveling, if you weren't around, you were gone for weeks or months, you had to make up all those prayers that you missed when you came back and pray in that particular prayer area. So this is, we complain, some of us, 5 prayers a day, and now it's so short, right? And especially in the northern latitude in the UK here, where the time between Dhuhr to Maghrib is a few hours only. So, how so forth. Can we combine, we're not traveling, but still, look at how much ni'mah we have that we can pray anywhere, even on a boat, even on a plane. And the nahi, the prohibition against praying in certain areas, not because of what those areas are, right? There's one hadith that talks about 7 in particular. I don't know, some include an 8th, places where it's one shouldn't pray. It's not because of the place is incorrect, but rather what might be there from najasat. There might be some najas. So even the prohibition, it's karaha, and it's makruh to pray, for example, in a church. Not because church, it's shirk, and if I pray in there, I can go pray in the church. But because there might be najasat, there might be, they don't have the same ahkam as we do in terms of cleanliness of the area. Walakin, they said, is that umin al-najasa, if you're sure there's no najasa, pray there. It's not against the deen or your aqidah or anything like that. It doesn't make you now one of them, all that silliness. So you can pray there, you can pray outside, as long as they're, amant in najasa, so forth. So they prayed on the boat, on the safina. So then, the idea of praying, and praying in within the times, وَكَانَتِ الصَّلَاةُ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. كِتَابًا موقوت, the prayers, كِتاب موقوت, يعني موقت, via certain times. So there's a significance to praying within the prayer time, not to make it go outside of the prayer time. Because remember, as we said in the beginning, we are people of nisyan and ghafla. We forget a lot, and we constantly need reminders. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing our nature, since He created us, He gave us 5 reminders, and then He spaced them out throughout the day for a reason, right? You can't just say, well, what's the difference between I pray the 5 or I just pray all of them at night? I still did the 5, all right, or pray them whenever I want. No, وَقَّتَهَا. He made them in specific times because our time, right, is our most valuable and precious capital. Time is something you can never gain again. Once that second passes or that instant passes in the past, you can never have it again, and you never will have it. It's gone forever. Even so, the person who, as the Quran says, gets to his grave and then is brought before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for judgment, and he laments of the time that he missed. Right? رَبِّ أَرْجِعُونَ لَعَلِّي عَمِلُ صَالِحًا فِي مَا تَرَكْتُ. أَرْجِعُونَ. Take me back to that, so maybe I can have an instant. I can go back. لَعَلِّي عَمِلُ صَالِحًا فِي مَا تَرَكْتُ. So that I make salih, do something right in the time that I wasted, that I tarakt, that I left. Those also read the Burda on Friday nights or Thursday nights. Imam al-Busiri talks about this too, about the time he wasted in his youth, in his shabab, and that perhaps this Burda will be a means of intercession for him, for his love of the Prophet ﷺ. So time is the most precious commodity. It's more valuable than anything else. And it's something also that we, some of us waste a lot of money, but all of us waste time somehow. We don't use the time to the correct way. So just as zakah is a purification of wealth, the salah, the salawat, and their spacing throughout the day is a type of zakah on your time. Right? So the time, think of it as that time that I wasted doing this, or I doing this thing incorrectly, or I didn't use it in the correct way, then this is my way of at least purifying that time that I had wasted before. So it's important that you pray within the prayer time. And when the Prophet ﷺ was asked, ما أحب الأعمال إلى الله عز وجل, what is the most beloved of things? One of his responses he gave once was الصلاة على وقتها, praying in its prayer time, and even better to pray in the beginning of the prayer time. So generally speaking, one shouldn't delay prayers except for a reason. You're engaged in something that either cannot be done at another time, and so it has to be done at this time, or you're engaged in something that's maybe equally as important as the prayer. Imam Malik, radiallahu anhu, when he was sitting with his students, teaching them, and then the adhan came and they started to get up. He said, where are you going? He said, we're going to go pray. He said, what you're doing here is not any less important than the prayer. So in this way, he said that finish the particular lesson and we can pray. Allah gave us some wusa', He gave us some flexibility about when we can pray, as long as it doesn't go out of the time. But to delay the time for no apparent good reason, right? You're just sitting around and you want to finish the game on your Xbox, right? What is it now? PlayStation 3 or Wii? I know all of them. I have children. I know what goes on. Right? And you're playing FIFA 2012 and you want to get you're in penalty kicks and you want to see who's going to win. But yeah, should I pray now? Well, let me just finish the game. Right? And then you play and then you lose to your friend and he said, well, let's have a rematch. Okay, there's time. Then you have the rematch and then it goes to overtime and penalty kicks again. So it goes. That's not a good reason to delay it. So someone who's muhtam, who's thinking about the salah, thinking about the prayer, then he stops everything for it. Even Aisha radiallahu anha, she said about the Prophet ﷺ, when he's with us in the house, then he was like almost playful with us. But if he heard the adhan, it's as if he didn't know us. It's as if, not that he acted like, as if he didn't know us. So the prayer is something that Allah is calling you. Right? إِذَا سَمَعْتَ النِّدَاء, that's Allah calling you. The mouth of the mu'adhin, the voice of the mu'adhin is just it's a tool, it's an ala. It's not what's calling you. What's calling you is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you hear the nida, you have to answer it. So how can you feel comfortable with yourself? You hear the nida, and this is it's plaguing Muslims in the Muslim countries. I'm still, I don't understand how people can walk past the masjid, hear the adhan, hear the iqamah, and they're actually sitting outside on the doorstep of the masjid talking with their friends. They don't think to walk in and pray. Happens all the time. Those people are mubtala. They're in a state of ibtila. They're being tried by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah that He show His favor upon them and that He frees them of their nufus and their hawa, because that's what's preventing them. But who's to say that we will not find ourselves in such a situation? So we ask Allah to protect us from such a thing. So the praying in the prayer times and observing the prayer times, very tantamount, very important. So much so that even they prayed on the boat. They could have said, well, let's wait till we get back, we're traveling, whatever. The hadith is not specific, but still they prayed on the boat. Qa'imain, right? So he said qa'imain, standing up. Why did he say that? Of course we pray standing up. Why would he say the hadith specifically saying that they prayed standing up? Have you ever prayed on a small boat before? This wasn't like a Carnival Cruise Line, ocean liner, right? Where you're on the top deck and it feels like you're home. You don't feel the shaking. No, this was a boat probably that wasn't very big at all. Maybe it could take a few people. So if you ever tried praying on such a boat, you know that the thing is swaying and rocking. And it's not that easy, actually, to do it. So he said, qa'imain, they tried to pray, or they prayed standing up. And then Al-Hasan al-Basri, who was a faqih, right, and was also one of the tabi'in, or tabi'in, he said, tusalli qa'iman, ma lam tashuq al ashabik, that you pray standing up, as long as there's no, here's the word he used, tashuqqa ala ashabik, and the masdar form or the verbal noun form is mashaqqa. Mashaqqa means hardship. So that means there's a concept introduced here, namely that all of our ibadat, all of our devotional acts and what we do, what's intended in them is not hardship. or let's say undue hardship. Type of hardship that would actually cause sort of physical damage to yourself, either temporarily or permanently. Because one might claim, well, you know what, fasting is difficult. I get hungry. Yeah, but you're not going to die or anything. It's a little bit difficult in the beginning, hunger pains and so forth, but it's not the type of mashaqqa that would grant you a dispensation or rukhsa not to fast anymore. Unless you're a type of person where it causes a type of mashaqqa that it would. Diabetics, for example, can't fast, generally. Someone who has diabetes and have to have the insulin, and the insulin is muftir. So not just the insulin, but they have to actually eat with the insulin. So it's not so much the insulin itself, the shot, but the fact that they go all day without eating. In order to maintain their blood sugar level, they have to be eating with that insulin. They just don't take it without food. So people like that, if they were to go the whole day and not eat and try to fast, they can get very, very sick. And maybe even beyond that, maybe it could lead to complications, even death. So the deen doesn't say such a person has to fast. They say, no, you have a rukhsa. Rukhsa means dispensation, right? In the Sharia, we have something called azima and something called rukhsa. The ulama al-usul talk about these two things. Azima means the normal state of affairs. In other words, you pray 4 rak'ahs, not 2. You don't combine prayers for non-Hanafis. You pray standing up and so forth. But if you have a mashaqqa, like he said here, مَا لَمْ تُشُقَّ عَلَى أَصْحَابِكَ, يعني a difficulty, then the Sharia is flexible enough. It allows you a rukhsa or a dispensation. So you don't have to pray standing up, you can pray sitting down. Even though if there's no mashaqqa, then you have to pray standing up. So this mashaqqa here, you can say, well, what can happen when you're praying on the boat? Well, you can become very dizzy. You might not be able to continue praying like that. Maybe you can't stand up, period, because you can't maintain your balance. Everybody has different levels of physical ability. Some people can do it, some people can't. And so that's up to each individual to, with consultation with an alim or scholar, to figure out if they're the ones who can take this dispensation or they shouldn't take this dispensation. There's no ta'meen. There's no generalization saying you can and you can't. So it goes back to the individual. And that's the beauty and the flexibility of the deen, that it allows you to do that. So تصلي قائما ما لم تشق على أصحابك, right? And here when he says على أصحابك is also significant. Yani the people you're with. He didn't say ما لم تشق على نفسك, yourself. He's talking about your companions. That means, so even though for you it's okay, don't make them standing up if they can't. Maybe you can. Fine, you stand up. But if they can't, they're older, they're maybe a little overweight, they can't stand, so forth, then they have the rukhsa. So and that means that to take a personal azima, right, and then try to apply it to everyone else, which is plaguing us too. It's one of the diseases of the ummah now, that people might have a particular conviction about an issue, which is fine. Ahlan wa sahlan fi. You want to fast every other day? Fine. You want to fast Mondays and Thursdays? Biha wa ni'mat, great. Some ulama said you want to fast every day? Fine too. But to want to say and apply that to everyone in your household, for example, right? So you make your wife and your children fast every Monday and Thursday, right? And she says, yeah, but honey, I'm not praying these days, I can't. No, you have to fast too. Gahil, he doesn't know that even she's not supposed to fast those days to begin with. But this is the type of excitement and about the deen, which is fine, which is commendable. But if it's not tempered with ilm, knowledge, right? Because they say that the less you know, the more strict you are, and the more inflexible you are, and the more unappreciative you are of other people's conditions and states. And so the less you know, then the more things that are haram for you. Because you want to be safe, you want to be cautious. So if you don't know the ruling about something, then it's just easier for you to say, well, haram, can't do it. Yeah, but no, haram. Because you don't know. But the more you know, right, And the more ittila, the more understanding you have of the deen, then you find that not everything is haram. And there's flexibility, and there's rukhsa, and there's other madahib that you can use when you have a darura, when you have a necessity. And this is the job of the mufti. Even if he's a mufti of the Hanafi madhab or the Maliki or the Shafi'i or whatever, when he's a general mufti, in our times, it's not enough that he just gives fatwa on his madhab. Sometimes people need a dispensation that cannot be found except in another madhab. And the ulama said that this is a situation where it's perfectly fine and normal for the alim to give them a fatwa on that another madhab, to make their condition, to alleviate their condition. People have the wrong understanding of the deen. When we, for example, we see the job of the mufti, it's actually to make things easier for people, right? Leave the job of judging and taking people into account. That's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The job of the mufti is not to make it more difficult. He's to make the deen more beloved to them. And if there is a way that he can find a rukhsa, a dispensation, then he should seek it and give it. That's what a mufti is supposed to do. But we have people here who want to be a judge of everybody else. And they only want to give them the strictest opinion, the most difficult thing to follow, and so forth. And then we wind up actually turning away people from the deen instead of bringing them closer. Because if they think that the deen is all that the narrow-minded view that you have, and they don't know anything else, forget it. Why? So they only think the deen is that. And if that's what they think, then they leave it. And then you become a fitna for them. Right? You become a fitna for people. What did the Prophet ﷺ say to Mu'adh? Right, when he saw him and he led people in prayer, and he took a little bit longer than what was usual, or what the Prophet ﷺ thought should he have taken. What did he say to Mu'adh? He said, "Afattanan anta ya Mu'adh? Afattanan? Are you going to cause fitna for these people? You want to pray a long time? Pray by yourself a long time." The Sahaba in the Shama'il, they say about the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "We did not find a prayer that was lighter and akhaf than the prayer of the Prophet ﷺ." They weren't sitting there like, when is this thing going to be over? It's taking so long. Abadan. The prayer of the Prophet ﷺ was, we know what surahs he prayed with when he was leading the fard prayer, right? كَانَ يَقْرَأْ مِنْ قِصَارِ السُّوَرِ, for example, Salat al-Asr, which would be anything from like Surah al-Duha to the end, and the same for Maghrib. And from Isha, he would read from Sabbih Isma Rabbika al-A'la up until the Duha, so also short surahs, but a little bit longer. And then the long surahs, and it says about the long surahs which he would read in Fajr or Subh, would be from like Surah al-Hujurat or Qaf till Amma Yatasa'alun, which are surahs that generally about a page and a half long, maximum, 2 pages. That was the long surah. Not more than that. And that was how the ummah. And it said also in the Shama'il and other hadith that if he heard a woman with a baby and crying behind him, he would lighten the prayer. He would shorten the prayer. Instead of some of the imams that get on the microphone and they say, "Sisters, how many times do I have to say don't bring your children to the masjid? And it's not right, it's not allowed, and you're making tashwish and confusion." Naam, you're right, it does. But look at the context of the situation. Many of our sisters, they stay in the house most of the week. Maybe they don't have interaction. This is the one time that they actually get to see other people. They get to see other sisters, that they have a feeling of community when they go to the masjid. So we have to have a better way of dealing with families in the masjid. It's not the same. The masjid should not be a men's club, right? Just like a nadi, where only the men get together and women are excluded, and they're supposed to just stay in the house. And maybe that was fine back in the Muslim society we used to live in. I recently visited, there's a city in Yemen called Shban, and it's known for its, what they call the prelude or the pre-modern skyscrapers. So they have tall buildings that maybe 4, 5, 6 stories. One of the interesting things is that the buildings are connected to each other, such as that there are actually pathways on higher floors that women could walk between buildings. So they actually go visit her neighbor and her neighbor's neighbor by walking through these pathways that are interconnected to the buildings. They never had to go to the level of the street. So they had their own sort of inner community there that no one could actually see and perceive. But we don't live like that anymore. We don't have that. People actually have to go out. You know, she can't just stay in the house all day. She has to go out and see, and maybe you have to drive her and things like this. So the situation has changed. People will try to apply the same exact rulings, but for different situations. That's a type of dhulm. That's a type of oppression. Because any faqih worth his salt will say that if the situation changes, إذا اختلف الحال أو اختلف الأحوال, then يختلف الحكم. The ruling might change based upon a change of situation, based upon a change of environment. And that's a precept, that's a rule that all the fuqaha go by. So I think we went over time now. I'll stop here and we'll continue. We may not get through that many hadith, to be honest with you, but I hope there's some benefit, inshallah.